Hello and welcome to a slightly different video today. I've been asked in numerous comments on numerous videos how I exactly calculate my driver of the weekend categories in my race weekend data analysis Pilot Series. And today I've decided to break down exactly how I'm going to do that. However, as I don't want to really bog this down and make it a uber long video, as there are at the moment, currently, as of the Hungarian edition, 28 individual categories that go into this makeup, I've decided to split this up into potentially 4 different parts, so they're roughly 15 minutes long, and we're going to break it down into some nice manageable sections. Then after this little series, I will also be breaking down the maths and the Excel formulas and everything like that involved in the calculations, as that is again something that has been suggested by a commenter and they would be really interested to see exactly the maths and the formulas that go behind it, as well as how I go about creating each of my individual categories. Now, one thing I will say, these are the categories that are correct as of Hungary. These change on a very regular basis. I'm currently scheduling a change for the British Grand Prix, but like I said in my previous video on the aggregate races of 2012, university work is unfortunately stacking up just a little bit, so there's a lot less time for me to create these sorts of videos, so they're taking a little bit longer to produce. So I haven't quite finalised that list, and I haven't quite decided exactly how it is working, so I thought rather than speculating on what they could be, I'll make a video on the 28 that I already know I have used. But with all of that yibba yabba out of the way, we will jump straight on in to how do I calculate the driver of the weekend for the Hungarian edition of my race weekend data analysis series. Now, today's video is going to start off with your individual performances, which are broken down into 13 main categories. And today we are going to be looking at the first 6 of these 13, as the remaining 7 are all fairly similar and are actually a lot more complex than these first 6. So the very first one that I have looked at is your position difference from the starting grid position to your finishing position. So what exactly does this positional difference from start to finish look like? I've just grabbed some screenshots from my Excel spreadsheet, and again this is the data for the Hungarian Grand Prix. We've got the laps on the left, and then we've got the 2 drivers, Hamilton and Bottas for today's example, and their positions on each of those laps, 1 to 5, and then 66 to the final lap on lap number 70. And quite simply, I do your position on lap number 70, subtract your position on lap number 1, and I pull up these values here. So Hamilton had 0 positional gains compared to Bottas, who had 3 positional gains. And then of course this is worked out for the remaining drivers on the grid, and then it is ordered from your largest gain to the smallest gain, and these can be negative. You can lose positions. And then once these are ordered, the 20 drivers then receive a rank 1 through 20, just a numerical rank, and there are joint ranks as well for drivers with the same gains. And then I end up with a table that looks a little bit like this, and these are just ordered in their teammates, and that is it. It's not ordered in the rank. So we can see that for Hamilton's 0 gains, his 0 improvement score, he ended up with a rank of 10, exactly the same as Lando Norris and also Sergio Perez. Whereas the driver that gained the most positions from lap number 1 down to lap number 70 is actually Kevin Magnussen, and he gets a rank of 1, and then the person that lost the most positions and has a rank of 20 is Nicholas Latifi, who went back 9 places. And so this would make up category number 1 of the 28 that we look at for the Hungarian Grand Prix. And so the second category of today's little episode, and the second of the 6 that we will be looking at, is your standard deviation of your positions per lap. Now I should actually slightly rephrase that and just say it is your standard deviation of your positions throughout the entire race, 1 through 70 for the Hungarian Grand Prix. And so what does the standard deviation of your race positions look like? Once again, taking the same screenshot from the previous category, Valtteri Bottas and Lewis Hamilton's positions on each lap, 1 through 5, all the way down to lap number 70. We can work out the standard deviation of all of their positions, and we get these values here to 4 decimal places. Or in Lewis Hamilton's case, to 5 decimal places. I thought I put that to 4 in Excel. Regardless, that doesn't matter. For the standard deviation, we are ordering all of these for the remaining drivers from the smallest deviation to the largest. And this essentially works out who was the most consistent throughout the Grand Prix. How far did you deviate from your mean position? And then again, once these have been ordered, the 20 drivers then receive a rank 1 through 20. There are again joint ranks for drivers who receive the same deviation. Now, as this is to many decimal places, this is highly, highly unlikely. And so pulling up that table of ranked orders, we have it a little bit like this. We see that Lewis Hamilton was actually ranked number 2. He wasn't the most consistent person in this Grand Prix. That actually went to Max Verstappen. He was ranked number 1, and then the person who was the least consistent, with a standard deviation of just under 4.5, was Romain Grosjean, 3rd from the bottom. And then again, this makes up category number 2 of 28 for the Hungarian Grand Prix, and then we move on in to category number 3 for today's video, halfway through, and that is your position gain from your lowest practice position to your highest practice position. We are now moving away from the race data and looking at the practice data. Now, what does the positional gain from your lowest practice position to your highest actually look like? If I just pull up a section from my Excel database, we can see the top 6 drivers: Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen, Albon, Leclerc and Vettel, and their positions in their FP1 performance, FP2 performance and FP3 performance. Now, sadly, my screenshots were a little bit iffy and the practice improvement score hasn't quite lined up how much I would like it to, but this is simply your lowest position, the max value in that range, subtract your smallest value in that range. And then again, this is ordered from your largest gain to the smallest gain, and then once ordered, the 20 drivers then receive a rank 1 through 20, very, very similar, or in fact exactly the same as the 2 previous categories as well. There are then joint ranks for drivers with the same gains. Now, I'm sure as some of you have noticed, this category seems to hinder those who are consistent. For example, Lewis Hamilton. He achieved a position 1 in FP1, nothing in FP2 as he didn't run as it was rainy, and then FP3 he was P2. And therefore he only had a positional improvement of 1, whereas Sebastian Vettel, who was extremely inconsistent, P6, P1 and P8, receives a higher rank overall as he had the most improvement. This is also affected by the rain in the session. And because of this, in the future videos, I'm actually going to be removing this category or slightly changing it about or not including it in the overall driver of the weekend, as practice data is a little bit iffy to use for things like this. So instead I could do a driver of practice, a driver of qualifying and then a driver of the race. So I'm looking at just the practice data and just the practice categories to decide that, just the qualifying categories independent of everything else, and then just the race categories independent of everything else as well, rather than jumbling it all together. And so what does this look like in terms of a table? We can pull this up here and we can see that Hamilton, Bottas and also Albon both receive a joint rank of 17 as they only improved 1 position from their worst position to their best, whereas Kimi Räikkönen improved by 10 positions from his worst to his best and received a rank of 1. However, to counteract this sort of possibly unfairness of this category, we move on into category number 4 of today's episode, and that is your standard deviation of practice positions. So what does the standard deviation of practice positions look like? If we pull up the same database for the practice positions of Hungary, but instead attach the standard deviation of those positions, we can see that we end up with an almost inverse of the previous category we saw. And we can see that the most consistent drivers, Hamilton and Albon of this list, receive the lowest number along with Bottas as well, and the least consistent people, Leclerc and Vettel, now receive the highest. And so these standard deviations are ordered from the smallest deviation to the largest. And then of course, once ordered, the 20 drivers then receive a rank 1 through 20. There are joint ranks for the drivers with the same deviations, as always. And of course, pulling up the table to have a look at this data, we can see that Hamilton and also Bottas are ranked quite highly, along with Alex Albon as well. And then the people who performed well in the previous category, like Giovinazzi and Grosjean, and also Räikkönen, are now at the back of this category. So I suppose these two categories do sort of cancel each other out, so perhaps there isn't really a need for either of them, but I just feel it's quite cool to include them and see what it looks like. But definitely in the British Grand Prix edition, which I'm still working on finalising those categories, they will not be included in the overall Driver of the Weekend category, perhaps just for a driver of practice, as there are far too many variables that go on in practice, like different programs, weather, etc, etc. And then we head on into the penultimate category of today's episode, and that is your positional gain from your lowest qualifying position to your highest qualifying position. Now, this qualifying category is exactly the same as the practice category, which looked at the same data. So if we pull up the top 6 drivers once again, Hamilton, Bottas, Verstappen, Albon, Leclerc and Vettel, but instead we look at their qualifying positions in Q1, 2 and 3, and then map on their improvement from their worst qualifying position, subtract their best. We see that it is ordered accordingly. And then once again, we order them from the largest gain to the smallest gain, and then once ordered, the 20 drivers will then receive a rank 1 through 20. There are of course joint ranks like we've seen so far this entire episode. And then again, this seems to hinder those drivers who are inconsistent, but a later category counters this, as once again we look at the standard deviation, which comes next. However, one important thing to note here is that drivers that are out in Q1 therefore cannot receive a positional gain, as there is only one data point of positions, so they do not receive a rank. It will be left empty for this category. However, this will not and does not affect them in any way, shape or form later on. And so looking at the order table for this category, we see that there are 5 drivers that are left out and do not receive their rank, and we can see that the lowest rank goes to Nicholas Latifi, who actually improved 0 positions and had a rank of 15. Compared to the person that gained the most, which was Charles Leclerc, who gained 9 positions overall and therefore had a rank of 1. And then moving to the final category of today's episode, and the one that counters this one, it is very similar to the previous practice category. It is of course the standard deviation of your qualifying positions. And so the final category of today's video looks at the standard deviation of your qualifying positions. So pulling up the same table but instead attaching the standard deviation markers, we see that once again it is the opposite of the previous category. Charles Leclerc is the highest on 3.86, and we have Lewis Hamilton at the top with the lowest standard deviation. And these standard deviations across the entire grid are ordered from the smallest to the largest. And of course, once ordered, these 20 drivers then receive a rank 1 through 20. There are of course joint ranks for drivers with the same deviations. And then once again, the drivers that are out in Q1 cannot receive a deviation, as there is only one data point, so they do not receive a rank, and this will not affect them later on. And so looking at the final categories table of today, we pull up this order here, and once again the same 5 drivers do not receive a rank, and we see that it is instead the inverse of the table that we saw last time. And there we go, there is the first 6 categories of 28 for the Hungarian Grand Prix all done and dusted. Bear in mind that these are changing for the British Grand Prix. I'm either removing some, I'm either slightly changing them around, or exactly how I group them together. So this is correct as of the Hungarian Grand Prix video that I've uploaded a little while ago, as it's a bit annoying that I've had to delay making these videos due to university work. But of course, if you guys have any of your suggestions of your own, please do let me know in the comments below, as I really appreciate all of the ideas that you leave me. It does help me, and it really benefits me and helps with the production of all of these statistics videos. And also, if you're interested in any of the F1 merch behind me, be it the Max Verstappen cap or the Suzuka track map behind me, I've also got my own Brawn GP cap that is signed by Jensen Button. I found that just recently. That is now in the background of the videos, or anything that has come from the Drive Crate box over my other shoulder as well. Check out my Drive Crate unboxing video in the top line of the description below. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode with whatever and whenever I decide to make it. I'll see you guys then.